Good evening, councillors and members of the public. I'm glad to say that I've got my voice back this time, so rather than last time. So anyway. Before we commence the meeting, I would like to draw your attention to the fire regulations which are on the screen behind me. Also, please can you ensure that your mobile telephones are switched to silent, and councillors, and I ought to tell myself this, can I please remind you to speak directly into the microphone and make sure that your card is pushed firmly into the console. Members of the public, I would like to say that as a committee, we understand that the matters under consideration tonight can be rather emotive. However, please be respectful of those around you in the public gallery and the committee and refrain from any booing, cheering or any other form of disturbance. This is not a public meeting, this is a meeting in public. Now, before we start, I'd like the officers to introduce themselves, please.
Thank you, Chair. Chris Turner, Principal Planning Officer.
Daniel Holmes, Planning Officer.
Rachel Kellis, Principal Planning Officer.
Beth Howland-Smith, Development Manager.
Barry Devlin, Planning Solicitor.
Thank you very much. And for those who don't know, I'm David Beeman, I'm the Chair of this committee. Here's John Rubini, the Vice Chair, and Fiona Cameron is taking all the notes. Right, we'll start with the agenda. Agenda item 1, minutes. I'm asked through the committee to confirm that the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of June are fine or okay. Anybody? They've been laid before now, half an hour before, yes? Is everybody? Very much. Apologies for absence, Fiona.
Thank you, Chairman. I've had apologies from Councillors Sally Dixon and John Neal.
I believe there is another.
Councillor Hess is making a declaration.
Regarding 2160? Yes. I declare a non-pecuniary interest as an ordinary member of the Farnham Society, and my wife, who's also a member and on the Farnham Society Planning Committee, to which I have no input or knowledge apart from their publicly stated objections.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hess. Right. Agenda item 4, questions by members of the public. Fiona.
None, Chairman.
Agenda item 5, questions from members.
None, Chairman.
We're doing well. Beth, agenda item 6, could you give us any updates to government guidance or legislation?
Thank you, Chairman. There are none.
Applications. So we move on to the main part of the agenda, which is applications for planning permission. There have been a number of site inspections which were held on yesterday afternoon. And we move on now to the first application, which is WA 2019-0514, 11 Castle Street, Farnham, GU97JA, a proposal display of illuminated and non-illuminated signs, a revision of WA 2018-1793. Mr.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. This application seeks planning permission for the installation of non-illuminated signage on the front and side elevations and the installation of name plaques on the front elevation externally illuminated by a downlighter above. The application has been brought before the Area Committee at the request of the local member in order to give further consideration to the impact on character. The application site is located to the southwestern side of Castle Street and is flanked by Long Garden Walk to the south. It comprises a 3-storey listed building which is currently in use as the Castleton Dental Practice on the ground floor with 2 masonettes on the first and second floor. The illuminated and non-illuminated signs subject to the proposal would be located here and here on the corners. This shows the location of the site. Here you can see Castle Street and Long Garden Walk. The site photos show from Site A, taken from the west towards the east flank of the application site. Site B is taken from the southwest, looking towards the corner of the application site, and photo C taken from the south, looking towards the south flank of the site. This shows the proposed signage from the front and side elevations. The front signage would be 3.91 metres in width and 0.45 metres in depth, and the side signage would be 1.79 metres in width and 0.45 metres in depth. This shows the proposed name plaques on the front elevation, externally illuminated by a downlighter above. There would be 5 name signs of 80 millimetres in height and 250 millimetres in width, and 1 opening hours sign, 200 millimetres in height and 250 millimetres in width. Officers consider the main matters for consideration by members to be the design and impact on visual amenity. Officers consider the size, style and design of the signage would be visually acceptable in its current location, and the external illumination would be modest and acceptable. The proposed static lighting at this site would only feature a modest external downlight and would constitute acceptable levels of luminance in an urban location. The design is considered to be acceptable on this basis. The design and impact on the conservation area. The officer report contains a detailed assessment of the impact of the proposal on the conservation area. The Council's Heritage Officer has been consulted on the application and raises no objection. It is considered that there would be no harm to the significance of the listed building or the conservation area. Design and impact on public safety. Whilst facing the highway, the proposed signage is considered to not result in any harm on highway grounds, as they are set back from the highway and are of a size, colour and design that are often associated with a small commercial unit. Town Council and third-party representations. Officers note that the comments received from the Town Council and from neighbouring occupiers, these comments have been addressed as follows. The application does not propose an A-board advertisement. It was noted on the officer site visit that such signage was in place and that it is shown in the photographs provided with the application. However, this A-board is not part of the application and should not be a consideration with this application. The proposed downlighting is considered modest and not likely to result in disturbance to neighbouring occupiers, even if the lighting was illuminated through the night due to the town centre location. Therefore, officers recommend that advertisement consent be granted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Dan. I think it was your first presentation, wasn't it? Yeah, well done. Thank you very much. Okay. Right, there are no public speakers on this item. I will declare I was the member who did call this item in following a number of representations from residents in Castle Street, including the owner, I believe, of the property who did object. Okay. Anyway, open to you, councillors. Who wishes to speak? Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you. Taking some guidance from the National Policy Planning Framework, there is a legal obligation to take note of the objections and refute by fact. So guidance has been sought. The policy or the framework says that the quality and character of places can suffer when advertisements are poorly cited and designed. The advertisement seems to be incredibly large, at almost 4 metres long, and on both sides of the building. Why is that considered appropriate when the side sign is almost on top of a Farnham heritage sign indication?
I've got 3 speakers.
Well, in my opinion, these signs are quite tasteful and fairly discreet. They are larger than the existing rather old-fashioned signs, but would better advertise the business of the dental practice. So for those reasons, I will be voting with the officer's recommendation to grant permission.
Councillor Bridge.
Particularly the sign on Long Garden Walk, it's so large, and there are several heritage signs on there which are completely overshadowed because you'll be distracted by the bigger dentist sign. So I think that should be a much smaller sign, similar to the one that's there already. Thank you.
Councillor Coburn.
I thought for 1 minute you hadn't seen me again, Chairman. I'm delighted. I'm glad you explained why you called it in, because I have to be honest, I had no idea why this was called into committee, so I'm glad you explained. I can't see anything wrong with this at all. I think it's tasteful, I think it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's not internally illuminated, it ticks all the boxes as far as I'm concerned. You know, we need businesses to thrive, and I think this is rather nice in terms of signage. I have absolutely no problem with it whatsoever. Thank you.
Councillor Mary-Louise?
I think that it is too large. I don't have any problems with the design, but I don't see why a dental practice needs to be screaming itself out in such a huge manner. We mostly go to dentists. We know where our dentist is. I just feel that that could be reduced in size. I agree with my councillor behind me, I'm sorry, Brian Edmonds, that it's too large. I think it should be condensed, it should be made smaller. I don't mind the design itself, but I don't see why it has to be so huge.
Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Birby?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Councillor Edmonds' comments that, in fact, I agree with Councillor Edmonds' comments, in fact, that you've got this large sign in the side road that appears to dominate over the Heritage Trail sign, which to me looks wrong. If we're going to have a Heritage Trail, why do we want an advert immediately placed above that Heritage Trail sign? So I'm not keen on it there. You can see the main sign along the main road. I'm quite happy with that, no problem at all. It's just this little bit round the side road where the sign is. Thank you.
Any other councillor wish to speak? Yes,
I just want to come back on that, because the Heritage Trail is something that we've put up to encourage people to go around and look at the buildings. It doesn't actually endow anything with anything in particular. It just says, you know, this is where you follow around and you'll see the buildings that we think are worth looking at in the town, including this one. And just Councillor Merrilley's point, you know, when you arrive in the town, it's not that easy to find a dentist these days, and you know, it's fine if you know where yours is, but I really don't think this is going to be so exceptionally large that it's going to you know, really affect the look of the town, which is really what we're trying to not to do, as it were, in the conservation area. So I can understand what you're saying, that it's quite large, but I really think, given its style, I don't think it's going to be a problem.
Thank you very much. Any,
Thank you, Chair. I would agree that the signage, the design is tasteful. I think the one on the front of the building is a decent size, and I think the one on the side of the building should be the same as the size as the one on the front. And if it was, then I'd be happy to pass that, but not almost 4 metres wide.
yeah. Any other councillor wish? Councillor Ward.
Just on a point of information, the one at the front, according to this number on the diagram, is 3.9, and the one on the side is 1.7. Am I being silly, or is there something wrong with these numbers?
Officers?
Yes, that is correct. I think it's probably the proportions of how these scale plans are shown on the screen here, but the greater width is the one on the top of the screen, that's a front elevation, and at the base is a 7 southwest elevation. Also, both of those are proportionate to the extent of the elevations on the front elevation and side elevation, respectively. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Ward.
So the one at the front is twice as long as the one on the side, is that correct?
Any other councillor wish to speak before we move to the recommendation? No. Okay, let's move to the recommendation. The recommendation is that, subject to conditions 1 to 7, an informative 1, advertisement consent be granted. Those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sorry, Councillor Blisham, were you voting in favour? Right, I think that's 7 in favour.
Against?
2.
Abstentions?
1. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Sorry, yes, that's...
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, obviously, the advertisement consent is granted. Thank you very much. At this point, I'm afraid I have to leave you, but I will be back. Sorry about that. I'll be back. So, the Councillor Rubini, the chair is yours.
Thank you, Councillor Bowman.
Okay, there we go. I'll leave me after you, so I'll have to come back.
You'll be back.
I'll be back. I'll be back. Yes. I'll be back.
Right, so we move on then to the matter of the church alterations following part demolition of existing extensions, alteration to parking layout and associated works as amended. If I could ask the officer to introduce, please.
Thank you, Chair. The site's located on the southwest of South Street in Farnham Town Centre. Comprises a Grade 2 listed congregational church building constructed of rough ashlar masonry stone. It's situated within the Farnham Conservation Area and the town centre area. The block plan that was on the previous slide and this slide show the relationship to the surrounding buildings. Photograph A in the top left. This photograph is looking from South Street in a southwesterly direction. Officers, I'd like to draw your attention on this slide to the mimosa tree on the right-hand side, which is here. Photograph B on the bottom left. This photograph is looking northwest from the Bush Hotel car park. Photograph C on the middle right. This photograph is looking from Victoria Road. Photograph D on the top left. Again, this is looking from South Street, but again, I would draw councillors' attention to the mimosa tree on the right-hand side. Photograph E on the bottom left. This is looking west. This is looking west down South Street, showing part of the building which is set to be demolished. Photograph F. This is looking towards Victoria Road, again showing part of the building set to be demolished, and I'd also draw attention to the eucalyptus tree in this photograph. This is the proposed block plan showing the proposals. So, included in the proposal is revised parking area here to provide 4 parking spaces, single-storey extensions on the rear and side to replace the existing 2-storey extensions, a foyer area providing a cafe. The reason I drew your attention to the trees in the previous slides, the eucalyptus tree at the back is set to remain, and the mimosa tree located here would be lost as part of the proposals. The front elevation shows the relationship to South Street. On this elevation, councillors' attention is drawn to the left and right of the photograph, here, which shows the proposed foyer area and the single-storey extensions which wrap around the back, as you can see on the rear elevation. I draw councillors' attention on the rear elevation to the increased visibility of the building in comparison to the existing 2-storey extension as shown on the previous photographs. The southeast elevation shows the relationship of the proposal to Victoria Street, and you can see that it would be single-storey in form. The northwestern elevation shows how the foyer area would look from this side. I'd like to point out that this would be would be extremely limited elevation due to the existing built form of the surrounding buildings, and the most realistic view you would get of this of this side of the building would be the northeastern elevation from South Street. The proposed floor plans show the proposed use of these extensions, providing function and activity rooms, and a mezzanine floor is proposed within the built form of the existing church building. These were updated visuals we received yesterday morning. These don't change the proposals by any means, but indicate for clarity to councillors that the front wall of the proposal is not set to change, which is this here, which wraps around the front. So that will not be altered at all. The officer's recommendation is that the loss of the mimosa tree, which contributes to the character of the conservation, to the significance, of the conservation area, would be lost, which would represent a less than substantial harm. However, the benefits of the proposal, which would provide community rooms and would provide a long-term additional function to the church, preserving the Grade 2 listed building, would outweigh the loss of that mimosa tree and the less than substantial harm to the conservation area. Therefore, the matters of consideration we think are of most interest to councillors are the impact on the conservation area and listed building, the impact on visual amenity, impact on residential amenity, highways and parking, flood risk, and the impact on the air quality management area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now we have one public speaker, Mr. Robert Blower. Would you like to come forward?
Michael Hopkins, the applicant. Oh, you're speaking as well. Yes, I speak as well.
His name there. Thank you. You have 4 minutes to speak, and 30 seconds before your 4 minutes finishes, you'll get a beep to remind you you've got 30 seconds left. Thank you.
My name is Robert Blower. I'm a chartered architect and I've lived and worked in Farnham for 46 years. I'm a member of the Farnham Society and I support the church's intentions to improve its facilities. In 2016, the Farnham Society expressed concern at the extensive demolition proposals set out in the Pilgrim Project brochure, with consequential loss of the lovely garden, mimosa tree, the fine large hall compromised and openings knocked into the fabric of the listed building. The Society believes the proposals fail to enhance and worse detract from the outstanding conservation area. Historic England are even harsher in their criticism, stating the current proposals are poorly designed and cause harm to the special architectural character of the listed building, that they lack the quality of the earlier extensions which shared the language of the main church, and that the design does not demonstrate any sympathy with the character of the existing building in its choice of materials, massing or form, and does not seem to acknowledge that the site is in the Farnham conservation area, that the proposals appear to work against the grain of the existing building. The Farnham Society considers the amendments made on the revised scheme are minimal and in no way deal with the significance of Historic England's assessment. It is hard to understand how Waverley Borough Council can recommend approval, especially as the listed buildings officer contradicts a previous recommendation for refusal, stating, "The proposed design is characterless and bland, making no response to the architecture of the church. Neither is the design of an innovative modern spirit, and from a conservation point of view, I would not be able to recommend granting planning permission." And now we are told it is well designed. The church owns a great product in a central location which it should use, not pull down. I have the blueprint of the drawing of the 1929 extension showing a sound building of steel construction designed by a top London structural engineer, which shows the building is readily capable of a third floor and lift. This would provide all and better facilities for the church at less cost, less disturbance, less maintenance and less harm to the listed building and conservation area, and avoid the need of costly extensions. What evidence is there to show that this building cannot be adapted? With imagination, a wonderful facility could be created which makes much better use of the existing buildings and which could stand for another 100 years. Borelli and Faulkner's achievements, skill and imagination in giving old buildings new life for new purposes, adapting and reusing, has given Farnham its outstanding conservation area, fostered by a policy of making the best use of our existing heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. Could you turn the microphone off, please?
Councillor Rubini.
Thank you. Now we have a second speaker, Michael Hopkins.
Councillor Rubini.
Oh, sorry.
Can you just make Chairman, can you make sure that the speakers do sit down? Otherwise, all we see is their trousers, which may be superb for all I know, but, you know, it's designed so that we see them when they're sitting down.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn. Unfortunately, I don't get that picture, so I wasn't aware of the problem. I'm sure his trousers are perfectly acceptable. Right, sorry, back to this. Could I now ask Michael Hopkins, thank you very much, and the same conditions apply. You have 4 minutes, and there will be a beep 30 seconds before you finish. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Michael Hopkins. I'm one of the ministers of the church. Our church has been part of the Farnham community since the 17th century, and we want it to continue to be part of the community through the 21st century and beyond. We've been developing significant engagement with the community. Over 34 different groups use our premises in an increasing sense of partnership. The current building is extremely tired, the systems are failing, the structure is cracking, much of it is inaccessible to the elderly and disabled. We've spent 5 years considering all the options. We spent a long time exploring less significant modifications. We considered relocating the church to another venue. All of these have significantly negative implications, and the scheme as it's proposed represents our commitment to supporting the community in Farnham Town Centre. The benefits for the community include modern facilities, full accessibility, a better cafe, more community space, warm, dry, comfortable accommodation. Our rationale is about improving our ability to welcome people, to bridge the connection between the sacred and the secular spaces. In reference to the mimosa tree, we regret its loss, but it has been planted less than 20 years ago. It is actually over large for the space it's in. It may start to cause structural damage in time to come. The rear extension facing onto the Bush Hotel car park will remove what is cloaking the original church. An unattractive 2-storey building will be lowered so that the original view of the rear of the church will be restored, described as well designed, and results in a reduction of the bulk of the building, considered to improve the appearance of the southern elevation of the building. The current proposals have involved many consultations with all the members of our church, all those who use our premises, and the general public. The church and the users are unanimous in their support. Of the general public who came to our consultations, 58 returned us a response form. All but 3 of those were supportive and the other 3 were neutral. We consulted the planning officer and the historic buildings officer. We've refined the design significantly to fit better the heritage aspects, to fit within the conservation area. We believe that what we are proposing follows the guiding principles of conservation to manage, adapt and enable so that the existing uses can thrive and grow, which is our whole intention here, coupled with the restoration and retention of the very best. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hopkins. That concludes the speakers. So, Councillor Hess.
I've got a slightly technical question here, which I've already run briefly past Chris, and I do apologise for the lateness in raising it with you because of other commitments I've had. And thank you for taking this one on, Chris, because you're standing in for somebody else. I'd like to ask about the buttresses on the northeast elevation, which is the left-hand side of the church. And also on the right-hand side of the church, which is mainly what I'm talking about is on the mimosa tree side, the right-hand side. Looking at the proposed plan drawing, I'll give you the drawing number. It's drawing number 200, revision H. It's showing the buttresses as white along that right-hand side flank of the church, and not grey as illustrated on the Victoria Road side. There is one buttress on the Victoria Road side which is shown as white as well. According to the legend, walls shown in white are for demolition. The drawing also has a note on the windows saying windows modified to form a new doorway. Well, to make a doorway out of a window opening requires removal of masonry below sill level. So this is really misleading. It's not modifying, it's removal, total removal. And these are lovely mullion windows, by the way. The removal of buttresses and masonry from the flank wall strikes me as destructive of the fabric of the listed building, and it's not mentioned in the grant of permission exemption dated the 11th of December 2016, and as I understand it, the route of seeking exemption is only available if there's no structural work proposed to walls. So if the buttresses are not to be removed, and it's an error on the drawings, we cannot pass this application with this error, as it would potentially allow the buttresses to be demolished, as the drawing indicates it to be so.
Sorry? Have I another councillor who wishes to... Councillor Edmonds.
I have three main concerns. The first is the constructability of this development, which I understand is approximately 2 million. It involves a lot of destruction and a lot of reconstruction. And I'm concerned that this will have a major impact on Farnham for an unknown duration. I'm not sure how we can give permission to something with so much uncertainty. The second concern I have is that the extensions are of dissimilar materials, which seem to be in breach of the local plan. And the third and final point I have is that there appears to be a door opening onto a pavement. Now, I understand this is not allowed by the Road Traffic Act 1980. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. Again, officers, do you want to respond to that?
Thank you, Chair. Can I come back to Councillor Hess's point on the buttresses? I think we are in agreement that they are set to be removed on the right-hand side of the...
Sorry, there's no comment from the floor.
As I say, that's our interpretation of the plans as you put it. So yeah, so we did, as within the officer report, we did consult the heritage officer on the proposal who didn't raise any concerns with the removal of the potential removal of those buttresses. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm getting increasingly worried about some of what we say in this committee. I mean, we are here to look at this application and see whether or not, in planning terms, it's acceptable. That's all we're here to do. We're not here to rewrite it, to tweak it a bit, to say what we would wish for in an ideal world. We're looking at an application. As somebody, I'm not a churchgoer, but I've been to several meetings and activities in this particular church where you always get a lovely warm welcome. But the facilities are awful. I'm terribly sorry to say that as you're sitting there. You know, they are well past their sell-by date. And one of the ugliest views in Farnham has to be this church from the Bush car park. I mean, it is just frightful. It may be in the conservation area, and the front of the church, which is being preserved, is a very attractive building. But that rendered, whatever it is, pebble dash, as I call it, stuff at the back, is not a thing of beauty, and never has been. And if you go into one of those rooms as you're going up to do your activity, the whole thing is not very pleasant. Nothing is soundproofed. I mean, you can have 2 or 3 activities going on, you've no idea what you're doing, whether you should be waving your arms or sort of banging a drum, you know, because there is just no soundproofing or anything. I mean, we're looking at a building that really and truly now is way past its sell-by date and not fit for purpose. And what we have here is an application to make this church a community building. Yes, it sits in the conservation area, and yes, most of it is very attractive, but not all of it. And I cannot see anything wrong in planning terms with what they are intending to do to this building. I really can't. I'm not bothered about the mimosa tree. I don't think it was a thing of great beauty. I'm sure you can put something back to, not necessarily a tree, I mean a feature. But I actually think this should be supported. I think what it's trying to achieve is to save a building, but to make the building vibrant again, to make it even more vibrant, to have the people that are currently using it in better facilities and to encourage more people to use it. We want footfall in the town. We want buildings that are alive. We want people in them. We want life. We want vitality. We do not want a building like this, which at the moment, as I say, looking at it from 2 angles, is decidedly ugly, set in stone because it happens to be in a conservation area. And I think we should look at this very carefully. What harm is being done by this application to this building, to the conservation area? And quite frankly, if in planning terms you cannot justify saying that there's going to be substantial harm, then, you know, we have to accept this application. We cannot tweak an application. It comes in, we look at it, it's either acceptable in planning terms or it's not. And I can't find anything in planning terms that makes this unacceptable.
Thank you. I think we're a question outstanding. Councillor Edmonds asked a question. Have you responded properly to that?
Well, apologies, Chairman. Sorry, can Councillor Edmonds repeat the point?
Sorry?
Sorry, can you repeat? I think there was a point about a door opening onto a pavement and there was...
Sorry, there were 3 questions. The first was the constructability without having a major impact on Farnham for an unknown duration, increasing the atmospheric pollution levels in the area. The second question, the second question was on the materials used. I understand from the local plan that they should be similar. They're very dissimilar. And the third question was the door opening onto the public footpath, which to me is dangerous. Apart from anything else, I think it's also illegal.
Thank you for repeating those. Just to go through, in terms of the atmospheric pollution and the arrangements for construction on demolition, what we could do is attach a condition which would require a construction management plan to be submitted ahead of any works beginning on site, in which we could look at where materials are stored, parking, dust, anti-dust measures. So we happily to attach that to any permission that's granted. In terms of the second point on materials, there is a condition requiring samples of materials to be submitted ahead of the construction. Those materials be it given the sensitivity within the conservation area, we would consult on with our listed buildings, our historic buildings officer prior to their discharge. And thirdly, in relation to the door opening onto the footpath, that's covered under separate legislation and isn't a planning matter. Thank you.
Sorry, could you repeat the answer?
For the third point.
Sorry.
Yeah, apologies. That the door opening onto the footpath that you raised would be covered under separate legislation. It wouldn't be covered under the planning considerations.
Mr. Chairman, it would be covered under the Highways Act, Section 137, and it would have to be a permanent obstruction of the public highway, alleyway, footway in question. And transient opening of the door is simply not that.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other officer want to answer any of those points before I move on? No, thank you. Councillor Blisham.
One thing that does particularly concern me is the parking area. It's been rationalised, so you've got slots for 3 or 4 cars, but the only way the cars will get in there is forwards. And if they're going forwards, they'll have to reverse out into Victoria Road, and I consider that as exceptionally dangerous. That needs to be rethought. They can't reverse in. There's no way they can do that. And if you look at the markings on the road, it's almost designed as if they do go in forwards. So that's something that needs to be seriously looked at. And I would say Mr. Blower has made some valid points, which I won't repeat, but I agree with him on most of his comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hess, you one time answer another question?
I do. I'd like to just go through a few things. The URC is an important Farnham church, and I think we should take a moment to consider the emotional effect that architecture and the built environment has on us. The church was built 142 years ago and will very likely outlive us and the buildings we're constructing today. We have an example of this in the Woolmead, built in the 1960s and gone in our lifetime. Therefore, it's our responsibility to alter listed buildings only if the extensions we are adding will be sustained for the rest of its life. We need to conserve what is probably never to be built again. I know that it might take a little more time, but it's better to get it right for future generations than to pass this application now with so many reservations. I will reiterate the point Mr. Blower made from an extract that Samantha Johnson wrote, the Inspector of Historic Buildings and Areas, Historic England. The design of the new extensions is particularly disappointing and lacks the quality of earlier extensions built in 1929, which shared the language of the main church. And she went on to say, the current design does not demonstrate any sympathy with the character of the existing buildings in its choice of materials, massing, or form, and does not seem to acknowledge that the site is in the Farnham Central Conservation Area. I haven't finished. The current proposals are poorly designed and cause harm to the special architectural character of the listed building. And I would personally like to reinforce what she says about materials and form. The aluminium doors and windows of the Victoria Road extension are more appropriate for a house extension, not a historic conservation area church. Red multi-brick is what you'd expect to see on a new housing development, like, for example, Montague Mews in West Street on the old Travis Perkins site. That's red multi-brick, okay? And it's not in harmony with the colour of the existing church and the 1929 extension, nor the use of red tile hanging, which is completely unsuitable on this church and best kept for domestic buildings. I have little more. We have no sectional drawings to even indicate whether the build-up of tile hanging would fit under the apse eaves anyway. So we're being asked to decide, partly blindfolded. And I really don't want us to end up compromising and passing this proposal, thinking that if we leave the materials to be conditioned by the officers, it will fix all the design shortcomings, as I believe it will not. I really feel for the congregation of this church. They're really lovely people and well-intentioned and want to make the church more up-to-date and accessible. But sadly, this proposal falls way short. Who wants their grandparents' coffin to weave amongst cafe tables and chairs to get to the altar? I also feel for them because in their proposal, their architects appear to have let them down, offering no study demonstrating that a remodelling of the existing buildings has been wholeheartedly explored, e.g. keeping the additions but perhaps removing the rear northwest first floor extension to open up the apse windows and installing a lift, which is perfectly possible.
Councillor Hess, can I ask you to wind up in 1 minute, please?
Within the 1929 extension, which could provide what is really needed. To simply demolish and construct inappropriate, mediocre extensions cannot be the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other?
So, sorry. Doing some research on this planning application, I referred to the local government lawyer guidance, and I perhaps need some advice here, because there is a statement which says where the demolition of one or more buildings is required as part of a redevelopment for which planning permission is sought, the developer should include details of the demolition in his application for planning permission. I'm just trying to confirm whether that is the case for a partial demolition. Thank you.
Officer would like to respond.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, we've got the plans which show the extent to which demolition would take place, and partial demolition is included within the description of the proposal.
Sorry, I took that to mean how they would do the demolition. In other words, how they would dispose of the materials. In other words, not what was going to happen, but how it was going to happen.
Okay, thank you. Apologies if I misunderstood. That sort of detail in terms of disposal would be detailed within any sort of construction management plan, which would be consulted upon.
Sorry, I really have a major concern for public safety with such a small footprint in which the demolition takes place.
Officer.
Thank you, Chairman. As I say, that sort of detail would be consulted upon and would not be approved unless it was considered safe for the methods detailed to be carried out. Thank you, Chair.
Thank
sorry,
you,
so you're confirming that...
Oh, sorry. Councillor Ward, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with an awful lot of what Councillor Coburn said about the facilities needing improvement. It is a fantastic church, it has a wonderful congregation, but the internal bits are showing their age. So looking at what they're doing internally, I really have no problems. However, externally, I do wish we could just tweak it a bit. Unfortunately, we can't. I really find this red brick thing stuck on the side out of character, most unattractive, and I feel it totally denigrates the look of the church. It rather reminds me of the long-lamented Redgrave Theatre, which was stuck on the side of Brightwell's house. And although it was a brilliant theatre inside, the outside of it was pretty appalling. And I just get a slight feeling of a bit of déjà vu here. And I wonder if some stone cladding to match the building, or as Councillor Bisham has just suggested to me, recycling some of the stone from the demolition and making this just match the church would just, I think, improve it enormously. So I have a big difficulty here. Thank you.
Thank you, officers. Have we already debated this point, or do you want to come back?
Thank you, Chair. Can I come back on a couple of points before we go take it any further? In relation to Councillor's question about the car parking, Surrey County Council Highways Authority have reviewed the proposals and don't raise concern from a highway safety point of view on those car parking spaces. That is contained within paragraph 9.4 of the officer's report, in which it says that there would not be a severe impact on safety and operation of the adjoining public highway subject to the implementation of the conditions. In relation to Councillor Hess's concern on materials, condition 7 at the back of the report requires detailed drawings of those materials and samples prior to any relevant works in relation to the cladding or the building of those materials. As mentioned before, those would be discharged in consultation with our historic buildings officer. I think it's important that we don't consider the annotation of the mixed red brick to be the final and the completely detailed description of that brickwork on the external faces of the building. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor Hess.
Well, my personal opinion is there shouldn't be any brick on the building in the first place anyway. There is a little bit of brick on the plinth, old, dull stock brick, but what you're looking at with modern day brick made in gas kilns is bright, very bright, right? As you get on developments, that's a red multi-facing brick. And in the case of tiles, even if you went for an expensive handmade clay tile, they're quite brash as well when they're new. They take probably 5 years to tone down, really tone down nicely. It's all inappropriate, sorry, but it really is. Not right, not good.
Thank you. Did any officer want to come back on that?
Thank you. Clearly, materials is a very subjective point. Lots of individuals will have different views on them. However, I would emphasise that this has been informed and looked at by our heritage officer, who has a considerable amount of experience at looking at these buildings, is very familiar with the conservation area itself. What you see on the screen is indicative, it's illustrative. What you don't see on here is the final material. When we do go through the process of discharging conditions, it's important to emphasise we do have physical samples brought in, and they will be looked at on site as well by the heritage officer. So they will be given very detailed consideration worthy of the status of the building and its position within the conservation area. So I'd just like to really emphasise that point for you. What members also need to consider looking at this is you do need to weigh into the benefits. It is subjective. We've got to look at the wider benefits to the building, the use and the community benefits that will bring through the expansion here. And those do all need to be weighed into the balance when you're making your decision tonight. Thank you.
Councillor Clark, you were holding your hand up just now.
Yes, thank you, Chair. One word, or 2 words, no bricks. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Merrilies.
Thank you. I absolutely understand the need for developing the church, and the work you do there is fantastic, and I've been to wonderful service there. But I also feel that we are surrounded by fantastic designers and architects, and I cannot understand how something that basically, if I'm being really rude, looks like a retirement home is bolted onto the side of that. I am very keen on aesthetics, hence you saw the thing about the dental practice. I don't see why we can't make things that work, that do the job that we want them to do, but also have the inspiration of good architecture and aesthetics. And I feel that that is a missed opportunity. And I also feel that one shouldn't say, oh, well, we need this, so we'll just have to, let's forget about actually the fact that people find it rather unattractive. Let's just go for it. We have the opportunity to have both. So why go for one and leave the other one behind? So, yeah, I think it needs redressing.
Thank you. So I think an officer wants to come back on that. 2 officers.
Thank you. Just one of us will speak, don't worry. Just what I was not saying previously was that the materials are considered unacceptable. I'm simply recognising that there are different views in the room regarding their acceptability here. However, I would, again, strongly emphasise that they have been carefully considered by our heritage officer, and a discharge of those conditions will. If members do fundamentally find the illustrative and indicative materials so fundamentally unacceptable, it is within your gift to decline the recommendation, to propose an alternative recommendation. However, I would emphasise that in any appeal situation, very careful weight is going to be given to the council's expert heritage officers in looking at this proposal, and in the absence of alternative expert heritage views to support a reason for refusal, I would just caution against the chances of success of that. Thank you.
Councillor Blishen, I believe you were next.
That one, yeah. Thank you. A few further thoughts. This is a valuable building. It's been there for years. Hopefully it will be there long after my grandchildren have expired. If there is to be demolition, it wouldn't be a bad idea to save the mullioned windows and any other parts. It's not just the stones themselves, but we don't want to bolt onto the side of it a modern building, because it's not a building that will last like the church has lasted. It won't last for generations. We need something attractive to last a long, long time to match the church. And there's a lot of reusable materials coming down with the demolition. Thank you.
Did any officer want to come back on that particular point?
Thank you. I think the question is really about how much materials can be reused within the existing building, if that's correct. We haven't got a lot of information about whether there would be enough materials to be able to do the whole proposal. I would say from a heritage perspective, quite often there is a preference to have a distinguished addition to the building. It can be quite difficult actually to integrate and have an extension to a building which does actually completely match the historic building. And one purpose through having these more modern extensions will actually be to really quite distinguish between the different ages of the building, so actually you're not detracting from that original building. So that's a further consideration there. Clearly, if it is open to the applicants to propose reuse of materials reuse of those materials from demolition when it comes forward to discharging those conditions. However, I would emphasise that is not what the indicative material suggests. I wouldn't suggest that's likely to make up the bulk of the materials you see before you. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you. Councillor Hess, you were next. Is it a different subject? You're not going to ask the question again?
Well, it's all about the church, actually, funnily enough. Since when is aluminium, windows, doors, etc., permitted in the conservation area? You know, I thought there was a presumption that we went for timber anyway, but that's not my main point. That's inappropriate material, frankly. But just coming back to this business about the buttresses, which hasn't really been answered, I'd just like to go into that a little bit more, because when the it's a bit of a tongue twister, this, the Wessex Synod Provincial Property Committee went for their listed buildings exemption. The items which they honed in on were the removal of pews and upgrading of the heating system, the removal of the small porch, boo hiss, that's beautiful, install a mezzanine in the large hall, remodel the existing foyer, and partial demolition and construction of halls at the rear of the premises. But it doesn't mention removal of structural elements in the walls. And if it had, they wouldn't have got that exemption. So I come back to the point that the drawings as presented, the one I referred to earlier, is showing the demolition of structural buttresses. And you can't gloss over that, I'm afraid. And if the fact is that that's going to take place, there's an error on the drawings. And we're considering an application that's based on faulty drawings.
Thank you, Councillor. Officers, if you'd like to come back on that.
Thank you, Chairman. If I understand Councillor Hess's concerns correctly, I think we're venturing into very technical territory under ecclesiastical exemptions, and just reading from Historic England's website, there are 5 exempt denominations, and the United Reformed Church is one such. And as an exempt denomination, they have their own arrangements for handling changes to historic buildings, and they provide the same standards of protection as the secular system operated by local planning authorities. So if you wished to go further into that, I would certainly recommend that we defer so that officers themselves can actually undertake further research into that matter. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Coburn.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just 2 points, really. One was on pastiche, because we have been, whatever the word, pilloried in this council chamber for supporting pastiche rather than putting on something that reflects the century that we're living in and making it blend in. You could say, well, this doesn't blend in, but that's subjective. You know, some people will think it looks lovely, and again, until we've seen the materials, it's hard to tell. I was living in Paris when they did the big crystal sort of diamond dome, whatever it is, outside the Louvre. And it was absolutely outrageous. You know, everyone, well, apart from the Parisians, they quite liked it, even from the start. But it works. It's a terribly modern statement, and it looks stunning next to the old palace. So, you know, you can... Sorry.
Sorry, I missed this.
No, sorry, I'm just being interrupted. So all I was trying to say was we have to be careful about asking for pastiche on one building and then saying that it's perfectly okay elsewhere. Its consistency is all. And we have got here an old building, a building that, as I say, is not fit for purpose, pretty ugly, and they are attempting to put on a modern extension. And I don't think for 1 minute it should blend in. It should repeat features in terms of shapes and that sort of thing, and get a brick or a stone that blends. But I don't think it needs to replicate to make it a stunning building at all. I think, you know, we really are very conservative with a small c in this chamber sometimes, and I'm not sure that we end up with anything any better by being so. And I'm quite convinced this would go through on appeal, so, you know, I don't think there's any problem for the church.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from councillors? Yes, Councillor Ward.
Yet again, I find myself agreeing with Councillor Coburn. Some stone that blended in would be very attractive. But if I was going to build an extension to a building with stone, I would put it in the plans and show it as stone. If I was going to build it of brick, strangely enough, I would show it as brick. So I have a problem here. We could perhaps go to crystal glass all around, and that would actually give us a view of the old church. Now, that might be quite interesting and modern. But I would direct your attention to the last sentence on page 25. This is a precondition condition because the materials go to the heart of the permission. And I utterly agree with the officers. The materials do go to the heart of the permission. And I'm just not happy with these materials, and I think we would uphold it on appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. Do the officers want to come back?
Thank you, Chairman. Only really just to say, completely agree with Councillor Ward's agreement with the officers that materials do indeed go to the heart of the permission, which is why we impose a condition which prohibits relevant work prior to the commencement, because prior to submitting and agreeing suitable materials, because absolutely we completely and utterly agree that that development can be rendered utterly unacceptable by inappropriate materials. That's why we have such control over this sort of development. So I would assure you, or I would seek to reassure members that this sort of condition would seek to ameliorate any concerns that members had in terms of materials, because we would consult extensively on these things, and if ward members were so concerned, we would also bring them into the consultation process. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'm just making notes. Yes, Councillor Ward, do you want to come back?
I was just wondering if we could sort of find a way out of this one and allow it to proceed. If we could add into condition 2 that the materials shall be of matching stonework to the building, we might be able to move forward. But I love the officers dearly, but I don't feel inclined to give them free rein on this one.
Officers, did you want to come back, or can I take the next question? Thank you. Councillor Hess.
What happened to upcycling, remodelling, utilising what you have, the energy use in demolition, the disruption in demolition, the disruption to foundations, possibly requiring piling caused by demolition, when you could repurpose a building that we already have beautifully and repurpose the interiors beautifully, giving you modern loos, modern kitchen, fabulous cafe. What's not to like? For goodness sake, you're all about knocking it down and putting up a brick scout hut. Frankly, it's not good enough. It's our conservation area. I have to reiterate that. I'm ward councillor for Castle Ward. I really passionately feel about that, because we don't get these buildings again. Once they're gone or mucked about with, they're gone. And I really feel passionately that we should not allow second-rate architecture. There are some very good architects out there, and some who will give their services to the URC for free to help them with this. It is definitely remodelable. Definitely. We don't have to knock it down. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor House. Are there any other questions from councillors? Yes, Councillor Blisham.
One small comment. It would be rather nice if we could save the 1929 extension stone and incorporate it somewhere. And also, I must say, having lived in Farnham for 35 years now and used Victoria Road for many, many years, it's too fast a road to back cars down onto, and Surrey highways are wrong about that, and I insist on that. Thank you.
Did any officer want to make a comment on that?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to read out 2 sentences from the comments made by the Inspector of Historic Buildings of Historic England. Whilst it is not necessary or even desirable to imitate the Gothic revival style of the main church, the design approach should respect it and be informed by it. The current design does not demonstrate any sympathy with the character of the existing building in its choice of materials. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. If there are no more questions, then we'll move on to decision. Now, as I see it at the moment, I think we have 3 choices to make. The officers were talking at one point, because of the ecclesiastic law, to have a deferral until they can decide what the law says. Secondly, we have a condition change about the material. And then, of course, we've got the original proposal. Would that be right?
There was also another potential condition about a construction and construction demolition statement or something. Yeah.
If I can take the first obvious one first for a deferral. Can I have hands up, please, for those who would wish to have a deferral?
So there's obviously a desire for that. Can I just have a proposal with a reason for the deferral, just to make it clear that, or just so that everybody is clear on what they're the reason that they're voting for a deferral?
So that the structural changes can be ascertained as per drawings regarding the flank wall demolitions of buttresses? Thank you.
Also to have to check that the ecclesiastical...
Just the extent of the ecclesiastical exemption.
Mr. Chairman, I think it was also to clarify the extent and scrutiny to which the ecclesiastical authority has looked at any questions relating to demolition of the buttresses.
I agree with that. There was a classical law that was involved.
Sorry, I didn't quite get that.
I think there's some doubt as to the extent to which the ecclesiastical authority has looked at the demolition issues arising appertaining to the buttresses, because that's within their control, that in terms of the listed building consent function. So I think that the deferral would be to elucidate with the ecclesiastical authority the extent to which the buttresses have been looked at and the demolition aspect has been clarified.
Thank you for that. Councillor Ward.
Could we also add to give the applicant an opportunity to reconsider and expand upon, or actually sort of tell us what materials they intend to use, because that's fairly critical to getting this thing through, and it will give them an opportunity perhaps to come back and say, okay, we will put stone facing on it to match, and we might all be jolly happy.
Officers, are you happy with that? Councillor Edmonds.
I would like the demolition and construction plan to be available to the public. I would assume that one must have been presented in order to estimate the cost of the development. Thank you.
Officers?
Thank you, Chairman. A construction management plan would be secured by way of condition attached to any permission granted. So it wouldn't be something that we would defer necessarily for. Thank you, Chairman.
So the public couldn't have sight of it before the agreement?
Officer?
Thank you, Chairman. With a construction management plan, it is generally something that we consult our experts with. That would be our environmental health experts and any other relevant experts. It would be available for examination once the any condition attached to a permission had been discharged.
The feasibility of this development is conditional on the ability to demolish and construct safely. That's why I keep emphasising the requirement for such a plan.
Yes, officer, yes, come back.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, demolition is subject to a couple of different regimes. We would certainly be looking to our experts for their views on any such plan. Because of its specialist nature, it is not the sort of thing that we would necessarily put out to public consultation.
Thank you. Now we need to draw this a close. We have agreed to defer it. Are the officers happy that the reasons for that deferral are now clear, concise, and legal?
Can I just confirm, Chairman, that the reasons for deferral are for officers to establish the extent of the ecclesiastical exemption insofar as the alterations to the fabric of the building are concerned, and to further work with the applicant in terms of materials to be used in the external construction. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. In that case, I think we've finished with this subject. Can I ask for a 1-minute recess while we fetch Chairman back in?
Sorry, Chairman, if I can just confirm that the committee is happy with those reasons for deferral. Agreed. Thank you.
Anybody know where he is?
microphone. You say, I always keep forgetting that. Okay, he's made it. Thank you. Okay, the final item tonight is an application not subject to public speaking. This is item B1, which is WA 2018-1787, the land of the rear of Trackers, 8 Burnshill Road, Recklesham, GU10 4RZ. The proposal being an erection of a dwelling and associated works, a revision of WA 2018-1787. All right. Before we proceed with this, I would ask Beth to do an update, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Members may well be aware that Waverley received an appeal for the previous application that was refused this morning. The appeal was dismissed, and the grounds for dismissing the appeal went beyond the reasons that the previous committee refused the application for. So officers consider that whilst it is within your gift to determine the application before you tonight, it would be eminently sensible for officers to go back to reassess the application in light of the appeal inspector's decision as a material consideration and come back to committee with this taken into account at a later date. Due to the timing of this appeal decision, it hasn't been possible for officers to do this assessment currently. So, yes, the officer recommendation has been amended for a deferral. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Coburn.
Yes, I mean, I read it first thing this morning and immediately contacted Chris Turner because, you know, it was obvious that we had to relook at this again. But I just really wanted to take this opportunity of saying that it was a very wise inspector, lots of support for TD1, lots of support for the Farnham Design Statement and the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan, the policies, and I really was so thrilled to see it. Not necessarily, I mean, I wasn't terribly opposed to either, whether it was going to be for or against, but just to see his reasons, I thought were terrific. So I thought it was great news for the local plan and for the neighbourhood plan and design statement. But I think we've no choice but to defer.
Please.
Yes, I agree with Councillor Coburn. Absolutely, I saw it and I thought, hello, have I got something wrong? I suddenly came in. But yes, I agree with that and very good. Thanks.
Then I think we will. Do we have to vote on that? I think it's, is everybody in agreement that we should defer this? Agreed. Right, thank you very much. There being no further items to consider in executive session, that concludes this evening's meeting. Thank you very much.